You think your landlord decided how much rent you pay. They didn't. A software company in Texas did, and they just got caught. In one Seattle neighborhood, a building using this software raised rent 33% in a single year. A building in the exact same zip code that didn't use it, 3.9%. Same street, same city, same year, completely different rent. The Department of Justice called it a digital cartel. They said it replaced competition with coordination, and renters paid the price. The company settled. But here's the part nobody's talking about. They didn't pay a single dollar in fines, and the algorithm is still running. I'm going to show you exactly how this software works, why your landlord had almost no choice but to follow it, and why, even after the DOJ stepped in, your rent probably won't go down. RealPage is a property management software company based in Richardson, Texas. They sell pricing tools to landlords, software that analyzes local rental markets and recommends what to charge. And they're not small. RealPage controls more than 80% of the revenue management software market. That's 24 million rental units worldwide. If you've rented an apartment in a major U.S. city in the last 5 years, there's a very good chance an algorithm helped set your rent. But that's not the problem. Market dominance isn't illegal. What they did with that dominance is, here's how it worked. Landlords using RealPage's software would submit their rental data to the platform. Unit sizes, locations, current prices, vacancy rates. But here's the critical part. They weren't just submitting their own data. Yet they were also getting access to their competitors' data. RealPage would aggregate all of that information, rents, occupancy, tenant turnover, from competing landlords in the same market. Then the algorithm would spit out pricing recommendations. Now, you might be thinking, so what? Lots of industries use pricing software, but there's a critical difference here. RealPage's software wasn't just analyzing public data, rent listings, market trends, publicly available information. It was pooling private, real-time competitor data, vacancy rates that hadn't been published, pricing strategies that were supposed to be confidential. In markets where RealPage had high adoption, landlords essentially had a shared pricing brain, and the numbers show it. In Seattle's Belltown neighborhood, 70% of the apartments were run by just 10 firms. All 10 used RealPage. In the DC metro area, more than 90% of units in large apartment buildings were priced using the same algorithm. In Atlanta, it was over 70%. But the algorithm didn't just set prices. It was specifically designed to push them higher and to eliminate the one thing that used to protect renters: the design. RealPage's marketing promised landlords they could outperform the market by 3 to 7%. Internal documents showed one major landlord, Greystar, outperformed their local markets by 4.8% during a rental downturn. Think about what that means. While the market was going down, Greystar's rents were going up, and RealPage was explicit about this. In a now-deleted promotional video, a RealPage executive said the software was, quote, driving rent increases in the double digits. Another executive, speaking at a conference in Nashville, said, very few would be willing to actually raise rents double digits within a single year by doing it manually. Translation: the algorithm would do what human leasing agents wouldn't. And the algorithm didn't just push prices up. It actively discouraged landlords from doing the thing that would help you most: lowering rents to fill vacant units. See, if you're a landlord and you have empty apartments, the traditional logic is drop the price until someone bites. That's competition. That's how markets are supposed to work. But RealPage's software actively recommended against this. The algorithm told landlords to accept lower occupancy, to leave units empty, rather than drop prices. A developer at the company looked at the people whose job it was to help renters and said they had too much empathy. It then built a machine to replace them. And the numbers back this up. According to the White House Council of Economic Advisors, RealPage's algorithmic pricing cost renters an estimated $3.8 billion in 2023 alone. That's an average of about $70 per month per affected household. One landlord, according to federal prosecutors, raised rents by more than 25% within 11 months of adopting the software. And here's the thing, landlords followed the algorithm. Former employees told ProPublica that landlords adopted the software's pricing recommendations about 90% of the time. When the algorithm said raise rents, they raised rents. When it said don't negotiate, they didn't negotiate. So the algorithm pushed prices up, eliminated negotiation, and encouraged empty apartments over affordable ones. But the part that made this a federal case wasn't just the pricing. It was what happened in the private rooms where competitors met. The digital cartel. Imagine this. You're a landlord. You have 500 units in downtown Seattle. Your main competitor, another landlord with 400 units 2 blocks away, wants to meet for coffee. You sit down and they say, "Hey, what are you charging for a 2-bedroom?" You tell them. They tell you what they're charging. You both agree to raise prices by 10% next quarter and keep vacancy low instead of competing on price. That's illegal. That's price fixing. That's a cartel. But what if, instead of meeting for coffee, you both just uploaded your data to the same software, and that software told you both to raise prices by 10%? What if the algorithm was the middleman? That's what the Department of Justice says RealPage created. A digital cartel. The DOJ's antitrust chief, Gail Slater, said the software, quote, replaced competition with coordination. And she was right. When landlords pool their confidential competitor data into one platform, and that platform spits out synchronized pricing recommendations, the effect is the same as if they'd colluded directly. And RealPage didn't just provide the software. They actively policed whether landlords were following it. The company created what they called a user group, essentially a private club for RealPage clients. According to the company's own marketing, this group grew from 10 members to over 1,000. Members would meet regularly, sometimes in person, sometimes virtually, to discuss pricing strategies. According to court filings, competitors shared private information during these meetings, including planned rent increases and occupancy targets. RealPage even celebrated when one landlord increased revenue by 7% using pricing recommendations discussed in these forums. Now, again, if 2 landlords met at a diner and agreed to raise rents by the same amount at the same time, that's textbook price fixing. But RealPage created a system where the same outcome happened automatically, at scale, without anyone having to shake hands. The algorithm was the handshake. The settlement. In August 2024, the DOJ filed an antitrust lawsuit against RealPage and 6 major landlords: Greystar, Camden, LivCore, Cushman and Wakefield, Willow Bridge, and Cortland. But here's where it gets interesting. Before the case went to trial, the landlords started settling. Greystar settled for $50 million, Camden for $56 million, LivCore for $8.5 million. And by December 2025, RealPage itself agreed to a consent decree. The terms? RealPage would stop sharing competitively sensitive information between landlords. They'd appoint a compliance monitor. They'd restructure how their pricing algorithm works so it no longer pools competitor data. Sounds like a win, right? Except RealPage didn't pay a single dollar in fines, not one. The consent decree requires changes to business practices. It does not include any financial penalty. The landlord settlements, that money goes to renters, right? In theory. In practice, $50 million split across hundreds of thousands of affected tenants means individual payouts that might cover a single month's rent increase. Maybe. And there's a bigger problem. Yet the algorithm is still running. RealPage said it would restructure the software so it no longer shares competitor-specific data. But the underlying technology, algorithmic pricing based on market-wide data aggregation, is not going away. RealPage already has a new version of the product. They're calling it compliant. Meanwhile, 10 state attorneys general have filed or joined separate lawsuits targeting the same conduct. New York and California have passed new laws targeting algorithmic pricing, and just this month, February 2026, the DC Attorney General filed a new lawsuit against 14 landlords and RealPage, targeting more than 50,000 apartments. So the fight isn't over. But there's one thing that no settlement, no law, and no monitor can undo. Rents went up 34.7% nationally since 2020. Some of that is supply and demand. Well, some of it is inflation, but some of it, and we may never know exactly how much, was engineered by a single software company that told competing landlords to stop competing. A developer at the company looked at the people whose job it was to help you find an affordable home and said they had too much empathy, then built a machine to replace them. 80% market share, 24 million units, 90% compliance, $3.8 billion in 1 year. And a settlement worth $0 in fines. That's the algorithm that raised your rent. If this changed how you understand your rent, subscribe. Every video on this channel reveals a hidden system that's quietly costing you money. Watch this next.